Heading into the offseason, the Arizona Cardinals face a number of big decisions in terms of their roster. And none of those decisions are bigger than what to do about Chandler Jones. Jones's contract situation has been a story since the beginning of the season. He asked for a contract extension, it wasn't offered. He then asked to be traded and the Cardinals declined, but he went into the season and played anyway, and now he's set to be a free agent. But the question is, what's it going to cost to re-sign Jones, and should the Cardinals make that kind of investment in an aging pass rusher? In this video, I'm going to look at what I think it's going to cost to bring back Chandler Jones, and discuss whether it makes sense for the Cardinals to bring him back in their current cap situation. In order to do this, I'd like to look at the average annual salary of the league's top pass rushers. When you look at this list, you see that the top pass rushers, players like TJ Watt, Joey Bosa, Myles Garrett, are earning in excess of $25, $27, $28 million a year. Now, as you go down this list, you see that it starts to creep in the upper teens, with Chandler Jones's contract that's set to expire having an annual compensation of $16.5 million. But when you look at this list, there's something else that should stand out to you. All of these contracts were signed by players who were still in their 20s. Chandler Jones is 31 years old and is going to be 32 before the start of next season. And while there are many players who continue to be effective well under their 30s, the reality is players in their prime, those in their 20s, earn more money than those in their 30s typically. And when you look at the salaries for pass rushers who sign their contract in their 30s, you see that the annual salaries are lower. Now, Spot Track includes Calais Campbell and J.J. Watt as edge rushers. I think you could argue that they're more interior pass rushers who sometimes play at the edge. But for the purposes of comparison, I think it's still relevant to include them in the conversation. You see that the highest annual salary for an edge rusher signing a contract in the 30s was $14 million by J.J. Watt. And then you have Brandon Graham at $13.3 million, Calais Campbell at $12.5 million. But none of these players are really great comps for Chandler Jones. Sure, J.J. Watt is at his tier in terms of a Hall of Fame caliber player, but I think it would make more sense to compare Chandler Jones to a similar type player, an outside edge rusher. And when you go back to that first list of edge rushers who signed contracts in their 20s, there's actually a player on this list who I think is a good comparison for Chandler Jones, and that is Cameron Jordan. Now, yes, Jordan did sign his contract when he was 29, 2 to 3 years younger than Chandler Jones is going to be, but there's an important note about that contract. He was 29 when he signed it, but it was a contract extension that he signed in 2019. And the first effective year of that contract at $17.5 million per year is going to be 2022 when he is 33 years old. So even though Cameron Jordan signed this contract in his 20s, I think it's still a pretty good starting point for comparison because that contract was offered to a pass rusher who would be in his 30s when he was earning that money. When you look at these two players side by side, I think they are fairly comparable players. Now, if you look at their sacks throughout their career, Chandler Jones, you could argue, is a better pass rusher. He's played one fewer season than Cameron Jordan, but has a half a sack more than he does over that stretch. They've both had some outstanding seasons as pass rushers, as well as a few down seasons due to things like injury, etc. But while Chandler Jones at least has a slight edge as a pass rusher in my opinion, the gap isn't terribly far in terms of pass rushing, and Cameron Jordan is better against the run. All things considered, these are two players that are fairly comparable. We could split hairs about one being better than the other, but I think it makes for a good starting point for comparison. Now, when you look at that contract, 3 years, $17.5 million, we do have to remember that that was signed 3 years ago. And although it is for a player at a roughly the similar age as Chandler Jones at the time of the contract, the going rate for players does go up just about every year. So if we were to accept the premise that these two players are pretty comparable and deserve similar contracts, that $17.5 million in today's market might be more like $19 or $20 million. So when you take that comparison and put everything together, the going rate for Chandler Jones is probably going to be a contract that's about 2 to 3 years and anywhere from 17 to 20 million per year. He will probably ask for more than that, and the Cardinals are probably going to hope he'll take less than that, but I'd guess that's roughly the range of what it's going to take to sign Chandler Jones. But the next question for the Cardinals is, does it make sense to pay that much money for Chandler Jones at this point? For the right team in the right situation, I think he deserves to get paid that money. But the Cardinals right now project to have about $5 million in cap space, and if they make a number of aggressive moves to clear cap space, they might get 20, 30, even $40 million in space. But that would involve cutting and or restructuring a lot of existing starters. So if they clear up that much cap space, they're also having to sign or draft players to replace some of those starters they've let go. And when you look at the full list of Cardinals free agents, it gets even more daunting. Players like Zach Ertz, Christian Kirk, Max Williams, James Conner, Chase Edmonds, AJ Green, just to name a few, are all players that are either going to have to be re-signed or replaced with other players. Signing Chandler Jones to $17 million, $18 million, $19 million a year is going to take up a huge chunk of whatever cap space the Cardinals are able to get. Chandler Jones is one of the best pass rushers in the league. Make no mistake about it. But on a team that struggled with depth at a lot of positions, you have to wonder if the best direction is to let Jones walk, bring in someone who's going to be less expensive, certainly not as talented as a pass rusher, but pair them with Marcus Golden and let them be your pass rushing tandem and spend the rest of that money on building depth at other positions. It's a tough decision, and Jones has been an important part of this team, but with contract extensions to Kyler Murray around the corner and a host of needs at other positions, it might be the kind of tough decision the Cardinals need to make. What do you think about the Chandler Jones situation? Should the Cardinals bring him back, whatever it costs? Should they move on and spend that money elsewhere? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're there, be sure to click like and subscribe to my channel. And also, click the notification bell so that you know when I post videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on The Cardinal Rule.